Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. In this episode, we're going to do 10 production, mixing and mastering tips. So we're back again. Please, as ever, subscribe, hit the notifications bell. Please download the cheat sheet somewhere up here and of course down below there. It's going to have all 10 of these tips. Now, as you know, these days we are producing, engineering, mixing and writing songs all at once. And to be honest, that might seem like a novel approach, you know, when you've got your laptop and you're building a track and you're writing it and you've got a singer with you or another instrumentalist. That might seem, you know, something pretty novel. But frankly, some of the greatest albums ever made were done that way. Whether it be the Beatles turning up to the studio with a few half-written ideas, doesn't matter who it is. Some of the greatest albums of all time were actually written in the recording studio. So if anything, now we're in this incredible place now where with just a laptop or a tower or whatever you have, and just your little I/O, now we have all these virtual instruments and all these incredible ways of recording. We have creativity coming out of our ears. So let's get stuck in to what I believe are 10 incredibly valuable tips on producing, engineering, mixing, and mastering your music. So number one, your workflow. Now, this is quite a simple thing. Where I am, I'm blessed. I have tons of inputs. I have tons of mic pre's and all kinds of fancy things and loads of microphones. So with 40 inputs that I have available, I can leave things permanently patched in. So whenever I get creative, I want to run in and play a drum part. Within seconds, I'm playing a drum part and I'm recording it. If I want to do that with a bass, I've got a DI and that's split out to an amp and it's permanently plugged in and I just go into record and off I go. Now, for you, if you only have 1, 2, 4, 6 or 8 inputs on your I/O, that isn't as easy, but it can be. That's where patch bays are worth their weight in gold. If you get a patch bay with say maybe 24 ins and outs, you could have your 8 mics on your drum kit always set up. You could have a DI for a guitar and or bass. You could have analog keyboard inputs. You could have multiple different, a vocal coming in, and all you have to do is have a patch cable that comes out of that patch bay and plugs into the front or the back of your I/O. And it's just going to be patching things. So my drums could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inputs, go into record, go and play. Now I want to bring the vocal into input 1. I unplug the kick drum mic, I plug in the vocal mic on my patch bay, and boom, ready to go. Anything that can increase the speed of your workflow is going to be a massive saving grace. When it comes to the analog world, having things coming up on a patch bay can really, really help you. Not to mention, of course, running external compressors or EQs or whatever else you might have. But literally just for mics can save you hours of work and frustration when you have an idea and your drum mics aren't set up. Number 2, organize your DAW. Create a template, not only for mixing, but for production as well. This session here, and this is an early session, so it's not even finished. The vocals on it are a different lyric, but you can see I basically have my drums set up here at the top. And then I have a bass line, which is actually a virtual instrument. It's vacuum. I have some guitars. I mean, this is a little scattered. I didn't organize this before to show off to you, but you can see it's like drums, bass, guitar. There's some, some swooshes and some crashes there, followed by some synths and some other guitars. All the lead vocals are together here. There's 3 tracks of lead vocals because it's overlapping. There's the lead vocal effects that I printed. Then all of the backgrounds are together. These are all backgrounds here. And I've got some other swooshes and bits and pieces and synths, which I would have done at the end. And then, of course, the mix down the bottom. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is just to say most of that is in my template, at least 60% of it. The drum mics come in, boom, kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, overheads, all in one go. The bass, which normally would be an electric bass, would have a DI and an amp input on my template. Just go into record. But if you have Addictive Drums, Trigger, Superior Drummer, Easy Drummer, one of those, have it in your template ready to go. If you have a favorite bass synth that you like, have that ready to go. If you have a virtual guitar amp that you really love, have that ready to go. Build your own template. Some of you might remember that when Logic first came out with those amazing templates, there was a period of time when it seemed like half the songs on the radio sounded like they were just using those templates. So you can see many people have thought this way, and in your DAW you may have templates all ready to go. However, you're going to want to always customize it for your particular workflow. But templates aren't always just about mixing, they're also about recording. Number 3, don't focus too early on sound design. Look, if you go back to my session over here, there is some sound design stuff going on, and these are the kind of things I'm sure you all do. There's actually an explosion in there, there's a reverse cymbal, all of this stuff. It's great, but I added that later on in the day. You know, working on this song, I wanted to add these elements to give the choruses kind of impact, you know, that explosion on the downbeat. You know, I did this riser here. Great things, but if I'm sitting there before I've figured out the arrangement of my song properly, or most importantly, I haven't even finished the melodies or whatever it is, it's too early for me to be thinking that way. I've done it where I've sat there and built tracks and made big splashes and explosions and sucked things down and spun them around and all kinds of crazy things. Unfortunately, the singer comes in and says, I don't like this melody, let's rewrite the chords. That doesn't work, this doesn't work. And I've spent 6 hours doing cool things that ultimately get completely changed. Now, occasionally you get lucky and they stay. But if you're in a creative zone and you're producing a song and you're writing a song, as so many of us are doing at the same time, producing and writing it at the same time, don't worry about those little tips and tricks, the little tiny little fun stuff. Leave it to the end, or leave it to a point where it demands that it has to be in there. Like you really want that chorus to pop, so you put in this riser and this swash. There you go, you put it in there for some impact, maybe to inspire the singer, but basically do not do it too early on. Concentrate on the bulk, the overview of the song itself. Number 4, too much time tweaking. We are all so guilty of this, me in particular. The thing I can think of, which is a great example, is not necessarily on compression and EQ and distortion and reverb and delay. I've spent hours tweaking something only to find out it sounded like absolute dog poop. I mean, we've all done that. The thing that I want to illustrate is when you may be building an electronic drum kit or something and you want that snare, and you sit there and you find this snare and you're like, it's not quite right. So you start boosting some EQ and then compressing it and then trying different sounds of compressors and then running a little delay on it and saturating it a bit. And before you know it, you're an hour into one snare, one electronic snare, when really you could have spent 3 or 4 minutes and gone through other variations of that same snare or different snares and found the exact one you wanted. We've all done it. We've all gone down that rabbit hole. We've spent far too long tweaking things. So if you are fighting with the bass sound, the electronic bass sound, or the electronic drum kit, or whatever it might be, just simply take time away from it and work on something different. Or throw it out the window and try a completely different kick drum sound, bass guitar sound, bass synth sound, whatever it might be. Try something different and just mute that and try something different and then compare it. I would say frequent breaks, you're going to hear this come up a couple of times, are a good thing anyway. But when you find yourself obsessing about something for too long, it doesn't usually end the right way, at least not for me. So avoid over tweaking. Number 5, monitor in more than one way. This is a huge thing. And there's a couple of reasons. One of them is predominantly that not everybody is in a beautifully treated studio with incredible monitors that, you know, go down to 20 Hertz and up to 20K. Most of us, even these big Genelecs behind me, don't get the super lows. So a sub is handy with this, or at least an acquired knowledge to know how much low end different instruments have. The reality is that no room is absolutely perfect, and even the perfect rooms have other issues, and you'll still need to monitor and check your mixes in other environments. You can have these little tiny baby speakers like this. That's great. Earbuds are great. But a decent pair of headphones that you know really well is a godsend in an untreated room. In a room that's got, standing waves or is really super boomy, just put on the headphones. It's nice to take a break and maybe listen to your favorite song, something you love and know really well. Listen to how the low end is on that, for instance. Then put your mix in and you'll be like, oh goodness. It will give you a great point of reference. This is where we talk about all the time, reference tracks come in handy. But the reality is, if you're just mixing, make sure you're listening in lots of different environments. And I know it's contentious and not everybody's going to agree with this because there's a lot of talk about it, but some of the biggest mixers I know still go out to the car and listen to their music. Because many of us are in the car for a couple of hours a day. I'm blessed to work very, very close to my house, but lots of people I know don't. And they are driving to and from the studio. They are driving at other times in their life and they're listening to music all the time. Every A&R guy I know listens to music in the car. They listen during the day and then they get in the car and listen to demos and stuff like that. So they know their environment. So don't be afraid to do a car test as well. It's particularly good for low end. Cars normally have a very enhanced over-the-top low end, which is not a bad thing because if you put your mix on in there and the kick drum is blowing up your car speakers, you know you're in trouble. So the ultimate moral of the story is listen in many different ways. Listen on different speakers, on earbuds, on headphones that you know, in the car. Just monitor in different ways so you're not just at the mercy of a room that's maybe not treated very well, acoustically needs a bit of work, and speakers maybe that only have 5 or 6 or even 7-inch woofers that don't go that low. So monitor in different situations. Number 6, use stereo enhancement plugins really sparingly. So we have one going on. Here it is. So it's this synth. It's a synth I sidechain to the kick drum. I've got a little R comp there. See what it's doing? It's being sidechained from the kick drum. It's a free little divergence here for you, but the kick drum is controlling the compression. See that big flashing yellow light? Turn it off. It's still doing it, but it's more exaggerated with this. Okay, so we've got sidechain compressed synth, then we've got stereo width here. It's set really wide, but it's set really wide to get out of the way and the kick and the snare. And it's only in one element in a mix. Maybe on the final mix, I used it maybe twice on synth pads or, other kind of instruments that are sort of very, very, very fat and take up a lot of energy. And they're just like huge fat sounds like that. I will widen them, just solely them, so I can sit my kick and my snare and my vocal, my bass down the middle. Otherwise, I do not put it on my stereo bus. I have known people to put it on the stereo bus that I respect, and they use it sparingly just to widen choruses ever so slightly. I think Mark Needham used a bit of it on his mix. If you watch the Jay Clifford mix, and if you've got that course, you can see him using it on that. And that's on a very, very analog recording. So it can be used sparingly, but use it sparingly. When you have multiple instances of stereo widening and it's messing with the phase and the polarity, it's fun to listen to when you're in the zone of mixing the song. But take a break from it for a couple of days, come back, and you'll be like, it'll just sound like it's out of phase and it will sound very hollow. So use widening plugins, stereo enhancement plugins, use them very sparingly. Number 7, monitor at low levels. Now, I don't mean like barely audible, like is there something playing? It doesn't have to be. I think that's one of the confusions where people say monitor at low levels. They say about 85 dB, which is not terribly loud, but it's safe to listen to for long periods of time. Now, all of the best mixers I know, they mix loud, they mix quiet, they mix loud, they mix quiet, but they don't listen for long periods of time loud. They'll crank a mix, they want to be blown away, they want to see if it's like pumping and they feel great about it for maybe 20 seconds, and then they'll bring it down. And they'll listen at a lower level, especially when you're looping a section and you're working on a great detail. You do not need to be listening to that super loud because you'll burn your ears out really quickly. There's 2 things that listening loud will do. Number 1, is it won't help your mixing because the frequency balance goes all over the place. You'll find you'll turn your ears down, you'll end up brightening a mix, and before you know it, you think it sounds great. The rest of the world thinks it's the brightest thing they've ever heard. That's number one. The second thing is, frankly, you can give yourself hearing damage for long sustained periods of high volumes. So be careful of that. Firstly, your mixes will suffer if you mix loud all the time. But secondly, and more importantly, you will sustain hearing damage if you do it a lot. So be careful. Your ears are your best tool. They're better than any plugin, any DAW, any instrument you've ever heard of. Your ears are your number one tool. Number 8, know your plugins. This one's a good one for me. I have to remember this because I started experimenting with new plugins before I really knew the ones I already had. Now what tends to happen is I go back to some old favorites, and you'll see me using plugins. Quite a few of them have been around for a few years now, basically because I know them inside out and I know what they do. I know how to make them sound great, I know what instrument to put them on, and I know what levels to boost and cut. I think one of the most difficult things is not necessarily as much about EQs and compressors, but when you start getting into delays and reverbs and all of that kind of stuff, because most delay plugins now, even the stock ones that come with any DAW, have many, many different sounds, many different emulations built into them, and you can manipulate them even inside of the plugin. And if you want to do even more than that, you could put a saturation across them, some kind of distortion, EQ, sidechain compression. You can do all of these fun things with them and treat them so dramatically different, just the delay that you have that's stock. Now, don't get me wrong, I love H-Delay. It's one of my favorite plugins. I love Sound Toys. Echo Boy is amazing. These are plugins that are phenomenal. But I'm just saying, I know Echo Boy and H-Delay really well, and I use them all the time, but I've been using them both for many, many years. And there was a time I didn't know them very well. Luckily, both of them are pretty easy to use, but there's some very complicated, especially lots of the all-in-one plugins, that may take you a while to learn to use. However, if you want to put in the time to use one of those multiple kind of plugins, then great, but you're probably going to find you're going to end up using that particular multiple one all of the time, which is fine. But you'll do that because you spent so much time, you've invested so much energy in learning that before you know it, every single channel has the same multi-function plugin on it. So get to know your stock plugins, get to know all the plugins that you have really, really well, and then of course add to them. Please add to them. There's so many great plugins out there. There's nothing worse than having 200 EQs, 200 compressors, 200 delays, 200 reverbs, you name it, and not knowing them well. You're better off knowing one or two of each of those plugins than not knowing 200 and having to literally audition every single one, by which stage your ideas, your creativity will have gone out the window. So learn what you have before you invest in anything else. Number 9. That's a reference for anybody. You know that one? Number 9. Don't be afraid to high pass super low frequencies. The reason why I bring that up is because most of us, even on these speakers here, like again, these Genelecs are phenomenal. I love them. The 1032s, I've been using them for amount of years. When I moved to Los Angeles in the mid-late 90s, every single studio in town, bar none, had a pair of either 1032s or 1031s and a pair of NS10s. Every studio. And it was great. We would travel from one studio to another and we would know how our mixes sounded. When we were sat between the speakers in the perfect listening position, it pretty much translated from one studio to another. It was a wonderful thing. Now, of course, everybody is building powered speakers, so they have a lot of competition. But for the longest time, they were the industry standard. However, without a sub, I could still miss low frequencies. The thing about 20, 30, 40 hertz in a lot of instruments is it's absolutely meaningless. It's great to have 40 to 60 hertz in your kick drum. It's phenomenal. On some super sub bass sounds, it's even better to have going lower. But tightening your kick drum, taking 20 hertz and below off, actually makes your mix feel louder, feel more punchy, and you'll be surprised your kick drum will feel like it has more low end in it because it's focused 40 to 60 hertz low end as opposed to like 20 and 30. So even though you don't hear those frequencies through your 5, 6, 7, 8-inch speakers, it's really about creating a great mix that doesn't have a lot of mud down there, and more importantly, isn't taking away a lot of energy from your mix, because low frequencies take a huge amount of volume out of your mix, believe it or not. You know, it's easy to make something sound loud when it's high mids, etc. So consequently, sculpting your low end will really, really help you. Now, of course, if you don't have a sub and you only have small speakers, use a frequency analyzer on individual channels, and many plugins these days actually have frequency analyzers built into the EQ, so you'll see those super lows that you don't need. So it's a big tip. It will really, really help you, and it will create a lot of clarity for the low end, and your mixes will benefit massively from it. Numero 10. This one's another big one. Don't overdo your master bus processing. We've all been guilty of this, myself in particular. There's this tendency to treat our master bus as the fix-it of every situation, which to a minor extent can be. There's a lot of videos I've been watching where it's like, clean up your mixes, and then they just do big EQ dips in the low mids on their overall mix. We all know, and if you've been watching, you know, the channel for a while now, you'll know that's really putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. You're better off going in and taking out low mids of the instruments that have got it building up, rather than annihilating the whole of the bus and removing it generically across everything. That's something for a mastering engineer to do, and only in extreme cases. So try to mix as you go on individual tracks, on buses, etc. before you get to the master bus. So you don't really want a ton of plugins on there. However, some gentle compression, just to tame some transients, a bit of EQ, bit of boom and fizz, as they say, maybe a little extra 60, some 10 or 12K lift, something to open up the top and something to reinforce the lows is not going to be an issue. And it's very typical with pretty much every single mixer I've ever worked with, whether they're using hardware like Pultex or they're doing it in the box. Little boom and fizz goes a long way. And even a little limiting is okay. It's okay to tame those stray transients that are going absolutely nuts. But once you start getting into the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dBs worth of gain reduction across multiple things, you're not doing yourself any favors. And you really are stopping yourself from learning how to mix as well, because everything is just being annihilated. You're going to become a much better mixer by leaving that till the very end and leaving it very gently. It can be on there, but just leave it very gently. Every mixer I know has an SSL bus compressor or something like that and some EQ. We all mix through that, but we don't annihilate it. In a perfect situation, you would actually master your track on another day or several hours later, or whatever it might be. You would take a break from it, you would take your 2-track final mix and then master that. That is the best possible solution. However, I do understand we all have time constraints. It's happened to me many, many times. I've got to print that mix and I've got to get it off to a client and I've got to impress them. So I will get a little aggressive on my master bus. It does happen. However, be careful. Don't overprocess it, because you can get really wrapped up at that stage. And remember, that's the last stage. That's the stereo mix stage. That is the end of your mix. So if you overdo it there, it can be pretty fatal. So I thank you ever so much. Of course, you can download the cheat sheet somewhere around about here. Please download the cheat sheet. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. And of course, let's have some discussion about these 10 points. Let's talk some more about that. Please give me your experiences. I really appreciate it. And have a marvelous time recording and mixing.